All right, so today we're going to be talking about navigation, MVC, which is Model View Controller, as well as delegation, so passing information between multiple views. So let's get started with a couple of important information. So first of all, we got a lot of questions on Piazza with this SIG abort error. And so one thing that we put in our how to ask questions on Piazza post is do not post just this. We don't know what this means. This is like a mysterious, very generic error that Apple gives you when your app crashes. So instead of doing this, please post the error in your console. So what this is like that black box on the bottom right hand side. And you can actually see the information that it gives you. So in this case it says app terminating app due to uncaught exception, reason unable to activate constraint with anchors, yada yada yada. So you can see that there's some sort of constraint issue, so that means you know exactly where to look. So this is probably in your setup constraints function, or maybe it's in when you instantiate the views, you've maybe forgot to add this view to the subview, or the subview to the view. So this information is super important. So first, you should read it and see if you can understand what it's saying and try and debug yourself. And then from there, if you don't understand it, please copy and paste this error onto Piazza and we can take a look, along with your code. All right. Another thing is if you're getting these constraint issues, so here we can see one of these constraints in the following list is one you don't want. This error occurs in your console. You can actually copy and paste the stuff between the opening parentheses and the closing parentheses into this website called WTF, Auto Layout. WTF stands for Why the Failure. And so you can copy into there, and it's a great way to visualize what these constraints are actually saying and how maybe your constraints are a little off or you should tweak them here and there. So yeah. All right. Another thing I want to go over quickly is some other ways of actually doing UI in iOS that we aren't teaching in this course. The first one is frame-based. So you might see these if you Google stuff that you're having trouble with in iOS. So frame-based basically means you create a frame for every single UI element. So that means that you give it an X position, a Y position, a width, and a height. And this is very different from NS layout constraint because you're giving it a very specific width and a specific height. And also your X and Y positions don't necessarily scale well with your screen sizes, which is why we're not teaching it in this class. So that's one thing to keep track of. And then another way is using storyboards, which is the main.storyboard file that you might have seen that we deleted in our last class. And one thing about this is you can really visualize it. It's great to see, but one bad thing about this is it's very hard to work with multiple people on the same app because it's really hard to tell exactly what constraints you've set. You have to really go click on this button and then set these manually there, so it's not readable to other people. All right, and it gets very complicated with multiple views, as you might see eventually. So just be aware that these are two other ways of doing it, but in our class we're focusing on NS layout constraint .activate whatever, and we're also creating our views programmatically using let view equals UI view. All right, so this is our first test of Polo. If you don't have the app on your phone, just feel free to look on with someone else. It doesn't really matter. So you enter the code once you sign in. The code is UQ0TRI, and then you should be able to answer the question. So I'll give you a minute or two. Wait, A or B?
A is yes, B is no. That's kind of laggy.
That is.
Yeah, the count is messed up.
Oh, yeah, that's all. Okay, it's been almost 20 more seconds. You just click end?
Yeah.
All right. So the correct answer is no, you cannot. Because we want everything to be consistent. Our graders are specifically looking for specific UI code in your apps, but you are free to explore these other options in your own time. Just don't do them on your projects for this class. All right. Now for another review question, also with Polo. So, how would you center a UI view in the center of the screen? So A, let's say the view is called my view. So you can say my view.center x anchor equal to view.center x anchor, my view.leading anchor equal to view.leading anchor, my view.center y anchor equal to view.center y anchor, and then D is A and B, and E is A and C. All right, so we'll give this one a minute also. Okay. All right, the correct answer is E. Most of you got this one right, A and C. This is because we want to center the view both in the center of the screen by the x-axis and by the y-axis. So that means that you have to use two constraints and not just one. There is no center anchor, just like the general center anchor. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, cool. All right, so now let's talk about how we create multi-view apps. So the first thing that comes with multi-view apps is how to present new views. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a UI navigation controller. And so what this is a controller that can handle pushing and popping new views onto something called a navigation stack. So a stack is first in, first out, or last in, first out, my bad. So that means the first view that you put on is going to be at the bottom of the stack. If you present a new view, that's going to be at the top, and that's going to be what you see. And then you can pop that off, so now the first view that you initially saw is now going to be presented. And we'll have more examples of this later. So here's an example of the Photos app using a UI navigation controller. You can usually tell that it's a UI navigation controller if you see that like gray bar at the top that says Albums. Albums is the title of the navigation bar. So you can see the plus button, that's an UI navigation bar button item. So you can create those as well. And you can see if I like tap on screenshots, it'll push a new view with all my screenshots. And if I press back, it'll pop that UI view controller back off. Oh, okay. I don't know what just happened there, but okay. So basically, you can have a view hierarchy of multiple view controllers. And as you can see here, there's a navigation view, which has that world clock bar. And then there's a view controller on top with actually the times in a separate view controller. All right, another way you can present views is modally. So this is directly presenting it on top of the previous one. So this animation looks a little bit different because the view will actually present from the bottom. And in this situation, there's no navigation stack. So that means there's nothing keeping track of what's on top and what's on bottom. It'll just directly be presented up. And so you'll see here, there's going to be, in the Ithaca Transit app, you'll present a view up, and then it'll be dismissed down. Like that. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. So now let's talk about something called Modal View Controller. This is a very common design pattern that you'll typically see just in app programming in general. And so what this is saying is that you have three components of your app. You have a view, you have a model, or multiple models, and you have a controller. So in this case, the controller is what's coordinating everything between the view and the model. So the view and the model should never be interacting with one another. In this case, let's say you have user actions and the view needs to be updated because of that. The controller would be updating the view. Or if you have a model, so like any object that you've created, and the controller, let's say you've like tapped something in your app, so you're incrementing an item, like or something like that, you want your controller to then update your model to reflect the new number of items you might have. So an example of this would be maybe in Ithaca Transit. How many of you have used Ithaca Transit before? Raise your hand. Nice. Okay. If you haven't, it's AppDev's TCAT app on iOS, coming out hopefully soon on Android. So basically, a model would be maybe like a bus stop object or a route object. The view would be maybe displaying a list of all the bus stops, or maybe the map of like all the stops that you see. And then the controller would be actually listening to the user selection. So maybe you tapped on a certain route. That means maybe you want to present that route on the map. And then you want to like update a new list of bus stops to display. So essentially, the controller is what's coordinating all this information between the model and the view and the model must stay separate. And so this is why we have something called a UI view controller, which is basically you can put your views and your controller in one place as long as your model and your views are separate. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. So now let's talk about how we actually send information between our view controllers. So one communication method that we use is called protocols and delegates. So the protocol is actually what's specifying what you want the information or what you want the other view controller to do. And one view controller can actually delegate another view controller to perform an action through this protocol. So let's say we have two view controllers and we want the second view controller to update the color on something of the first view controller. So how would we do this? We would define a protocol and we'd call it changed color delegate or something like that. And it's going to have a function inside that's called did change color to new color UI color. So it's saying this function is going to input a new color and something is going to handle it. And so let's say view controller is the one that we actually want to implement this did change color function. So this way view controller is now inheriting or implementing the change color delegate. And so now change color delegate must be implemented, or the functions inside change color delegate must be implemented. So let's say we have a UI label that we want to change the background color of. We can implement this function. So now label.background color is now set to this new color. So where do we actually call this in our other view controller? We use a delegate. So first, let's say we want to push or present this other view controller. We can set the delegate to the current view controller that has the function implemented. So this is saying I'm going to be delegated to change the new color based on this other view controller. And then we can present this new view. So in this other view controller, we have this thing called a delegate. And this variable is weak because of automatic reference counting, which is like memory management in Swift. You don't have to worry too much about it. Just use the weak keyword for now. And so let's say we have some sort of button or some sort of function that's called when we want something or someone to change the color on the original screen. And this view controller actually has no idea that the original view controller exists, but they're saying, hey, if you're out there, I'm going to delegate you to change the color, and hopefully you can change the color to red. So that's what this delegate.didChangeColor to red is calling. So we see that before we actually presented this view controller, we set the delegate to view controller. So indirectly it knows that it's going to delegate that view controller to change that function call, or to call that function that actually changes the label's background color. And here, this method actually physically calls that function, did change color, in the view controller, UI view controller. Does anyone have any questions? All right. It's a little confusing to wrap your head around, but we're going to start with...
Can we say like Java like interface? And, like,
oh, yeah. It's similar to like implementing an interface in Java, if you've used Java before. Okay. All right, let's open up our starter code. So if we all open Xcode, does everyone have this downloaded? Yes? All right. Okay, so if we have this open, let's run the app just to see what we want to do. So basically, I have like set up a bunch of two buttons in our view controller, and we have one that pushes the navigation view controller button and one that's called present modal view controller button. And these two buttons, what I want them to do is when you click on the push nav view controller button, we're going to use a navigation controller to push a new view controller on, and then you can dismiss that. And then for the present modal view controller button, I want to present a view controller modally, so it'll present upwards. And then in that view controller, I want a text field where we can actually change the name of the button on the original view controller. So there we're going to use like the protocol delegate methods. All right, so let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so it's here. Oh no, I got a SIG abort. What do I do? Okay, check your console. Good idea. Okay, so it says, terminating app due to uncaught exception, unable to activate constraint with anchors, NS layout x-axis, and this x-axis, because they have no common ancestor. So no common ancestor means that these two views don't share like a sub, or share the same like parent view. So that probably means I'm missing something in my like initializing, initializing this button. So if you see where I have this present modal view controller button, what is something that I'm missing? Or maybe two things. Yeah. Good, yeah. All right, so I forgot to add it to the subview. All right, is there anything else I might be missing here? Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So if I don't have the translating auto resizing mask into constraints set to false, the view's not going to show up on the screen, and you're actually going to end up with a bunch of those like auto layout issues that I showed before. All right, so now if we run this,
Are you recording, by the way?
yeah. Okay, so now I have two buttons. I have one that says push navigation VC and one that says present modal VC, change my name. So if I click on these right now, they have print statements inside the functions. So let's actually implement this. So the first thing that we want to do is if we want to use a navigation controller, we have to create or instantiate a UI navigation controller in our app delegate. So that'll create that like bar thing on the top of the screen, because right now it's just a white screen and there's nothing here. So that actually creates the ability for you to push and pop new view controllers onto your current view controller. So we're going to go into appdelegate.swift, and I'm going to create a new navigation controller. So let navigation controller equals UI navigation controller. Oh, wait. And so we want to use this root view controller. And this root view controller is what's going to be the starting view controller that's going to be presented when we open our app. So we're going to want this to be the view controller. And so now that we've created this navigation controller, we can replace our root view controller of our window to be this navigation controller. And so now, when I run this, you'll be able to see that we have the bar on top. And now we can actually start to present our new view controllers using the navigation controller. So see, you can now see this bar on top. So that means that you have a navigation controller created, and the first view, or the root view, is this entire white view controller. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. Okay, so now let's actually create the next view controller that we want to present. So to do that, you can do Command N or File, New File. And we're going to want to create a Cocoa Touch class. So we click on this. We're gonna change it to, let's say like nav view controller, because we wanna push this view controller using our UI navigation controller. Click next. And then this will just go into our L3 folder. So you click create. All right, so now that we have this, this is a whole new view controller. What happened? I don't know. Oh, it's not. Okay, 1 second. My Xcode is not happy with me today. So let's set that new navigation, or that new nav view controller's background color to blue. Do you have a question? Oh, can you guys help him? Okay, now we're back. So I need to recreate that. So if you do Command N, Cocoa Touch class, nav view controller, create, replace. All right, so now that we have this, oh my god. Why isn't this working? Is this supposed to happen?
No, I don't think. What?
It's just like not responding. Oh my god. Okay, let's try this again.
You close like the keynote and like whatever other stuff you have.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, let's just work in this file for now and see if it works. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have this, and let's say we want to set the background color to be blue. So we can do view dot background color. So we can set it to dot blue. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can actually set the title of the navigation controller. And let's say we want that bar at the top. You remember in the Photos app that it said like albums and then it changed to like screenshots? We can just set the title to this as a string, and you can set it to whatever you want. I'm just going to say blue view controller. And so this is just going to create a plain blue view controller with the title at the top saying blue view controller. Let me see if I can, hold on, sorry for switching, but. Okay, so now we have it in here. All right, so now how do we present this actual view controller? We can go inside here, and inside our push nav view controller method, we can actually, oh my god, okay, that was weird. Okay, what is going on? Okay, is that someone's phone, or is that my, okay. All right, so anyways, we're gonna delete that, and we're gonna create our modal view controller. Or not modal, sorry, nav view controller equal to nav view controller, kind of like how we instantiate it in the app delegate. And then we can actually call navigation controller dot push view controller. And so we can push this nav view controller and set animated to true. So that'll make that actually swiping motion. And so the reason why navigation controller is an optional is because the view itself doesn't know whether or not we've created a UI navigation controller or not. So if navigation controller is nil, nothing will happen. This view controller won't actually be pushed. However, if it does exist, because we know it exists, it'll push on this new view controller with the blue background. So let's try running that. There we go. So now if I click the push navigation VC button, you can see that a new view controller has been pushed on. We know it's new because it has a blue background and it has a fancy title of blue view controller. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Yeah. So view.background color is blue and then title is blue view controller. I'm going to be uploading all of these, all the code after class, so if you miss something small, you can go back and reference this. Yeah. So the view controller itself has a variable called title, or UI view controller has a property called title, and so that's why you can just directly say title equals. It's like self.title. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
Is this recorded online?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. So now let's think about how we're going to present this modal view controller. So here, so now we have this created modal view controller that I made that's already in the starter code. You can see we have a text field, a button, and we have the constraints. And we also have this function called dismiss view controller and save text that we're going to use inside is connected to the button that we can use to actually dismiss the view controller and then change the title of the button in the original view controller. So how we present new view controllers modally is using the present method. So let's say we want to instantiate the modal view controller. And so how we present this is we just use the keyword present. And you can see this method down here, view controller to present animated completion. So the view controller we want to present is the modal view controller. We want it to be animated so it actually swipes up from the screen. And then completion is actually, we'll set it to nil because it's an optional. It's basically if you want something to happen after the view controller is presented, you can write some code there. But we'll talk about completions later in the course. Okay, so now once we have this, we can try running the app. And if we click present modal VC, this will come up and it has a fun, change the view controller's text, like whatever. But this button currently does nothing. So how do we actually send this text field information to the original view controller? And then how do we connect those up? We use a protocol. So let's just define a protocol here. Yeah. So let's call it protocol change button title delegate. You have to define it as class. And so we want a function that's called, that actually will take in the text and send it back to this current view controller. So let's say change button title, and then let's take in a text that is a string. So now that we have this function called change button title, we can actually implement this function inside of our view controller. And so how do we do that? We can define an extension down here. So an extension of the view controller, and it's going to implement the change button title delegate. And so once we do this, the extension keyword is basically saying this is part of the view controller class, but this specifically implements the change button title delegate. So what this means, so now it's getting angry at me because it's saying type view controller does not conform to protocol change button title delegate. And what this is saying is you haven't actually implemented the method that we actually specified up above to change the button title. So how do we fix this? You just click fix, and it'll actually give you the function that you need to implement as a part of the protocol. So how do we actually want to change the button's title? Does anyone know how to do this? So the button is called Present Modal View Controller Button. How do we set the title of the view controller's button? Yeah. Yeah. Nice. All right, so we're going to do present modal view controller button dot set title, and we want the new title to be the text that we got inside the function. And we're just going to set the state to be normal. So what this is doing is it's going to, whenever this method is called, we're going to change the button that's currently on this screen. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. So now that we have this, we actually have to implement the delegate inside of our modal view controller. So what this is saying is we want the modal view controller to be able to delegate to our view controller to change the button title. So it's saying, tell the view controller to change the button title. So what we need here is another variable that will be called the delegate. And it's going to be of type change button title delegate. And it's also going to be optional because we don't know from this modal view controller whether or not we can actually tell someone to actually do this. Okay, so now that we've created our delegate, we're going to actually implement this function now. So currently, we want to be able to change the button's title inside the original view controller to match the text field's text in modal view controller. So how we do this is first, let's grab the text from our text field. So how do we do that? Let's say we want to save it in a variable called text. So we have a UI text field called text field. How do we get the text inside of it? Yeah.
Text field on text.
Yep. All right, awesome. So now that we have the text, this text is actually going to be optional, right? Because the text inside could be nil. So let's use an if let statement. So if let actual text equals text, and then we can actually chain on another Boolean to add to this if statement. Because if we change the button's title to be the empty string, now we can't even click on it because we don't know where the button is. So let's say we don't want the button's title to ever be the empty string. So we can actually say actual text is not equal to the empty string. So this is saying if actual text is actually a string, it's not nil, and the actual text is never equal to the empty string, now we want to delegate that we want like the button title to be changed. So how we call that is delegate dot change button title with this new text. So what do we want to use? We want to use the actual text that was in the text field. So now that we've done this, the view controller will actually call its method change button title, and it'll set the new button's title. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah.
So why does change button title have to be a function that's defined in a protocol? Because we've already set the delegate as a variable for the class. So hypothetically, could we just call delegate .source function that's defined in view controller but not as part of the protocol?
Good question. So the question is basically, why do we have to say specifically a method that's implemented in the protocol? Because there's like a bunch of other functions that we've implemented inside our view controller, right? We have this function called push nav view controller. We have a function called present modal view controller. Like, why can't we just use those instead? Or like, we could directly set the button's title. The thing is, modal view controller has no idea of anything that's going on inside view controller because it doesn't know that a view controller was presented before it. And the reason why it knows that this change button title exists is because it was defined as a protocol with this one specific function. And your protocol can have multiple functions. Like you could add functions here, just for other things that you might want to use. But the protocol is basically like a menu, I guess. And the menu is like defining clearly, this is what you can order. And so Modal View Controller is like the person ordering at a restaurant, and it's looking at the menu, and it's saying, oh, like there's a recipe, or there's a dish called change button title. Like I want that. So it'll delegate that specifically. And like View Controller is kind of like the chef. So it's saying, this is my menu, I can make that. So that's why it can change the button title. Does that make sense? Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, cool. So going back to Modal View Controller, so now that we've actually changed the button title, we want to be able to dismiss this so we can actually see the button title that was changed. Because once you present it, you want to be able to dismiss it. And so dismissing it is very similar to presenting it. So we say dismiss, and we call this method that says animated completion. And so we want it to swipe downwards. So we're going to set animated to true and completion to nil again, because we don't really need to handle anything once the view controller has been dismissed. Okay, so now let's run this. Put it over here so you can see the code. Okay, so we have our two buttons. This button can be pushed, and then we can present this one modally. So let's change the text to hello everyone. So now if I click dismiss and save text, it should change the view controller. Why did this happen? Does anyone have any ideas? Anything, any idea? Did we actually tell Modal View Controller when we created it who its delegate was? No, right? So this might come up when you're working on Project 3, so just be aware of it. So in View Controller, when we presented it, Modal View Controller has a variable called Delegate. And in this instance, when nothing changed, when I dismissed the view controller, the delegate itself is nil, so nothing is going to happen. And how you actually call the delegate to actually do something is you have to set the delegate variable to point to a specific view controller. So in this case, we want the modal view controller to have its delegate point to self. And what self is referring to is this specific view controller, so view controller. And so now that we have this, and now that we've set the modal view controller's delegate to be this view controller, when the delegate calls change button title, this present modal view controller button set title will actually be called. Does anyone have any questions about that? Oh yeah, it's back on. Sorry about that. All right, so let's try running this again and see if it works. Okay, so we have this function called present modal view controller. We present it. Let's like change the text again. And now if we click dismiss, since the view controller has this function change button title implemented in it, and we've set this current view controller's delegate to point to this view controller, we can now click dismiss and the title has changed. So it's pretty cool because now you can actually send information between view controllers, and you couldn't do this before. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, I think that was it. All right, so as a reminder, the add deadline for this course is coming up soon, so if you want to take this class for credit and you haven't yet, or you don't have an enrollment pin, please post on Piazza like a private note with your net ID as soon as possible. And then project 3 is going to be out after this class, and it'll be due on Sunday. So we'll be holding office hours again on Sunday. All right, that's it for today. Thank you.